So, welcome everyone. We seem to be at some kind of tipping point here, at least in my household. And of course, we're probably at a lot of tipping points globally. At any rate, I just got off another Zoom event, a Rebel Wisdom Resilience and Sense-Making day-long event. And the last segment I was part of was a guided meditation with Ali Biner doing something he calls sovereignty meditation, the currently kind of hip term to use. And my sweetheart Sophie is downstairs on another Zoom call that she's managing with Acharya Judith Zimmer Brown leading the white tar practice for almost 300 people. That's just now finishing. But so anyway, this is kind of this tipping point into this new world we're living in now, and may become much more a part of our landscape as we go forward, even more so. At any rate, let's sit for a few minutes, and then I'll offer a bit of a talk, some remarks, and then we'll have a dialogue. So, finding a posture that for you feels naturally uplifted and dignified, and at the same time stable and relaxed, awake. And having found your way to that posture that works for you, gently bringing your attention to the body. And not just the concept of body or memory of body, but the actual moment-to-moment, very direct experience of being alive in our human body, the landscape of actual physical sensation. All the sensations we can notice and feel all across the surface of the skin from head to toe. As well as all of the internal sensations throughout the body, all the way down to the bones. For some of us, it may work since we're often kind of up here in the head a bit. We're so auditorily and visually oriented and thinking oriented, just letting our attention drop down from the head through the neck, shoulders, upper back, chest, down through the torso and waist, hips, buttocks, to the upper legs, lower legs, and all the way to the soles of our feet. Or for you, it may be you'll just begin with those contact points between your body and the chair or the cushion and begin expanding your attention and awareness from there, extending it throughout the body. And also, since we tend to be fairly externally focused, your attention may begin on the surface of the skin and then gradually moving inward into the body, feeling the overall weight and mass of the muscles and bones, sensations of relaxation or tension, aliveness or numbness, any areas of discomfort, any aches or pains, any stiffness in the body. Perhaps we can feel the overall flow of nervous energy or even more subtle life force energy in the body. The heartbeat, the pulse. Again, whatever we can notice and feel throughout the body. And breath after breath, doing our best to cultivate a benevolent space of non-judgmental awareness in which to simply allow our experience to come and go as it will, embracing the full range from pleasant to unpleasant, everything in between, neutral, comfort, discomfort, pleasure, pain, just embracing the entirety of our physical experience to begin with, and then also the rest of our sensory experience and our emotional experience and our cognitive experience, just letting it be and employing the deeply felt presence of the body as an anchor to help anchor us here in the moment, in nowness, in being. As well, you may be aware of when you're noticing or observing sensory experience with a bit of distance, a sense of subject object. It's quite natural and really the beginning of our practice in psychological freedom to be able to stand out of our experience and observe it rather than just being lost in it. And having established that witnessing capacity, then you may find at times you can relax into a less dualistic way of being with your experience and just feeling it directly, what we call direct sensing or feeling. So, in terms of the breath, we could be observing the breath as it flows in and out, the passage of air across the nostrils and parted lips, rib cage opening and closing, lungs filling with air and releasing the air, the diaphragm muscle contracting and relaxing, which properly drives the breath with good diaphragmatic breathing, the belly rising and falling. That entire flow of sensate experience, it just flows in and out, just like waves lapping at the seashore. So we could be observing that, or we could drop into just feeling it without so much of a need for a separate observer or witness. Just feeling the breath without any need for a feeler. And then maybe we could relax even further into just being the breath, being the breath, being the body. So I just invite us to explore that. And to the extent that you're relaxing to a quality of simply being, a felt sense, a really physical, emotional, cognitive, felt sense of being, I invite you to inquire for a moment whether within that quality of being in this moment, whether there's anything missing or whether there's anything that would make that being more complete than it is. Thank you. So again, welcome. So I'd like to continue from some of the themes I brought up last Sunday. And for those of you who weren't here, I'll just mention a couple. So last Sunday, I spoke about the extent to which a lot of our suffering is actually self-created and resides in our preferential mind, the way we want things to be, which we all have, of course. And I have plenty of preferences. Just a moment. I sent you a second email. I sent you a second email that ends in 816.
I used the second email and I've been waiting for 15 minutes to do that in my reports.
Okay. So if our host, Kate, is there, if you could open the meeting to let Sophia, and she came in a little late because she was finishing the white tar practice. So I'd appreciate it if you could open that up. So, and that the world is just not going to cooperate with our preferential mind. Never has, never will. I think I mentioned last week this phrase that Trungpa Rinpoche had used in a teaching at one point, the dictatorship of the phenomenal world. And of course, we have a lot of negative connotations around that word dictatorship. And what he meant was that the phenomenal world, reality, is as it is in any moment. And we can engage in all kinds of, gnashing of the teeth and wishful thinking and all kinds of things about how we think it should be or wish it would be. Or we could actually just get curious about how it is in the moment. Now, that's not to say this is not some transcendental view that everything's perfect and therefore we should just let it be as it is and everybody's suffering is their own karma. That's not what we're talking about at all. Obviously, we all have an aspiration to continually evolve personally, evolve our world so it's as just and fair and peaceful and supportive to as many beings and sustainable in relation to our first mother, the earth. And I think it makes a huge difference when we approach any efforts to evolve and change from that place of deep recognition of what is and some level of acceptance of not saying that it's okay or anything it's okay, but just getting in relationship. Okay, this is what is right now. Now, of course, many of us are set up by our circumstances to have more challenges than others. Many of us enjoy a lot of privilege, most of it probably unearned, some of it earned in some cases. And many people are very vulnerable in so many ways and experience a lot of suffering that has systemic and structural causes of all kinds. That's absolutely the case. And many of us are set up psychologically because of our childhood conditioning or because of the experience of trauma of various kinds, social, historical, individual, family, to engage more in creating or perpetuating self-created suffering, not because we want to, but just because there's an automaticity to our conditioning. So all that's true. And of course, the ground is compassion for ourselves and for others and real recognition of that's all true. That's part of recognizing reality as it is in this moment and recognizing it with a profound sense of compassion and willing to feel the pain of all the injustice and all the trauma in the world. And I believe it's fair to say that for any of us, regardless of what our circumstances may be, the only person that can shift it for us is us. Now, that may not seem fair, but it's just simply the case. The only person who can shift our own personal circumstances and create a different destiny other than one that maybe causes and conditions have set up for us is us. And we may need tremendous help to do that. And we may need to reach out for help. And of course, there's a lot of injustice around the distribution of help and resources and all of this. We know this. And yet it comes back again and again to what can I do? And then what can we do collectively? So I'd like to continue in that vein. And I'd like to do it in the context of what we're all going through together here with this global coronavirus pandemic. I've been, as I'm sure all of us have, watching a lot of different things. I do tune into some of the mainstream news and mostly CNN. You know, I get on the CDC site and other places where I feel like I can get relatively objective information. And I've also been, you know, tuning into online conferences and teachings and dialogues and podcasts and all kinds of things to get a deeper view of things and what's going on and how people are making sense of it. You know, I was one person I've watched who I just watched a presentation earlier today and have watched a number of times, kind of a futurist, integral thinker, deep thinker, sense maker named Jamie Wheal. And he, like others, have been using a lot this expression shit show, that we're in a real shit show here. And, you know, that's true on many levels, obviously. And, you know, and it's sometimes refreshing for somebody to break the boundaries of conventional mainstream media and be able to say something like shit show, right? And actually, even mainstream media is loosening up a bit. I'm expecting Anderson Cooper to say shit show any day now on CNN. Because, you know, they're just being forced out of their habitual patterns by the enormity of what's happening. So I appreciate that you know, can wake us up, cut through the conventional how you're supposed to talk, and you know, and at the same time, it's not the whole truth, because this shit show we're in the middle of, for me, is actually a potentially profound, and maybe whether we like it or not, profound individual and collective spiritual experience. You know, using scientific language, people talk about how our culture, our society, our infrastructure, our community, societal, governmental resilience is really being stress tested here. And individually, we're all being stress tested, right? So our backs are up against the wall. We're really being challenged. And of course, we all know that that's when all the growth happens, right? That's when all the growth happens, because it's just the nature of habitual patterns at the individual level, the relationship level, the collective level, governmental systems, all of that. The homeostasis of those systems creates a lot of resistance to change, or in some cases, immunity to change, which is a term used by a Harvard professor. Immunity to change, resistance to change, or in an inertia, right? It can be very hard to change. We all know how hard it is to change our own habitual patterns, even the ones that really cause us a lot of suffering. It's really hard to change. And so, and we also have probably had the experience sometimes that some big shift in our life actually allowed us to make some changes that we had not previously been able to make. Right? So we're all at that moment where of tremendous disruption. We're not only are we being challenged in terms of our level of fear and anxiety and trying to figure out how to best take care of ourselves and our families, how to interact with the world, how to deal with all of our concerns about our physical, financial well-being, how to survive. One of the dangers here is that rather than being focused on thriving, we're being thrown back at, just how am I going to survive? And I think the key to our survival long term is really to think in terms of thriving. That may seem kind of weird, but I really think this is a way to reinvent ourselves to thrive into the future and survive in the process of doing that. So we're also, though, being really, thrown into a deep questioning, whether we're aware of it or not. I would imagine most of us are quite aware of it, especially the people on this Zoom call, that because of our practice, we're all quite aware of it, that we're being thrown into a deep questioning about our lives and who am I? And how have I been living my life? And does that really make sense? Right? The way that all of our system, structure, culture, ways of life is being more than stress tested. It's being disrupted to the extreme and pointing out to us so many ways in which the way we've been living on this planet is completely unsustainable. And of course, we've known that for a while, obviously. And most of us have probably been well aware of the dangers of human-caused climate change and either the looming or already present climate emergency that we're in. And then, lo and behold, here we are right in the middle of one of these global disruptions that has been predicted. So who am I in the midst of this? And what do I prioritize my decision-making around? What do I really value? What's the whole purpose of being a human being on this planet? What is the purpose of life? Why are we here? And why am I here? And whatever time I have on this planet, what am I going to do with it? And, that's in our face more than usual because we have a natural tendency to ignore what we perceive to be unpleasant. So death is one of those primary things that we tend to ignore the reality of. And as we get older, any of fellow gray-haired folks on the call here, we know it gets a little more difficult to ignore that as we get older. When we're young, it's quite easy. We all think we're immortal when we're young. At least I did. And but right now we have the danger of death in our face, very much so with this pandemic. And we see that it's respecting no boundaries. So that can be very anxiety provoking, and at the same time, it's a tremendous opportunity to really go deep in ourselves into what my Zen teacher, Bernie Glassman, called not knowing. Letting go of all of our fixed ideas about ourselves, about others, about life, and really being willing to just suspend all that. We have this desperate need to know. That's what our whole personality and ego structures are all about. Ever since we had to separate from our mom or surrogate parent, we started grabbing all the reference points we could and created a self out of that, which is, okay, I know who I am. I know what the game is here. I know how to survive, right? Get my needs met, right? And it's all about knowing. I want to know. We walk into any new situation. What do? We first start scoping out how does it work here? We really gravitate toward knowing. And then, of course, people feed us a lot of knowings, a lot of reference points to addict us into their streams of materialism and so forth. So suspending that is easier said than done. I would say it's the goal of all the inner practices of all the world's great contemplative traditions. Is how do you get out of that conditioned mind into direct experience? How do you suspend all those filters of our conditioning and just be with things as they are? And being with things what they are is what my Zen teacher called bearing witness. My first teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, called it holding your seat, not running away. Allowing ourselves to be naked and fully exposed with our hearts wide open to reality as it is. The third of the three tenets, as these are called in the Zen peacemaker order, not knowing, bearing witness. And the third is, originally it was called healing for quite a long time. Then Bernie felt that word was a little too loaded. Then it became loving action. Sometimes I preferred compassionate action. I even used it in business settings and called it effective action. And towards the end of his life, Bernie just wanted to not qualify at all. He just said the actions that arise out of bearing witness from a place of not knowing. And what that has always led to, and humans have been discovering this for thousands of years in every culture, that when we're able to be with reality as it is, suspend our filters, that what can arise out of that is natural wisdom and wisdom-based actions. And my theory about how that works is because I have a deep, deeply felt experiential confidence and faith in the innate goodness of all beings, my own, yours, everyone, all of life, that innate goodness, what Trungpa Rinpoche called basic goodness. And my theory is that when reality meets basic goodness, what you naturally get is wisdom-based action. That's appropriate to what is. It's not based on any preconceived notions or agendas. It's a natural wisdom-based response to what is. And that response sometimes could be non-action or waiting until action becomes clear. And it's not a one-stop thing, because you might go through that process and then just stumble into perfect, most skillful action in the world. And 5 minutes later, that action could be the dumbest thing in the world, not appropriate at all. So we're continually coming back to bearing witness from a place of not knowing and trusting that. So we're all in the midst of a profound journey here and a profound opportunity. So yes, this may be a shit show on a relative level, but I think on a deeper level, it's a profound spiritual experience that we're going through, and a profound collective experience that we're going through on all different levels. One of the powerful parts of that is that all of humanity is focused on one thing right now, for the most part, more so than probably any time that we know of in our history, certainly in our lifetimes. I mean, when you think about the things that bring people together by huge numbers, it's like the Super Bowl, the World Cup, sporting events, the Oscars, not to put down any of that stuff, but it's not exactly innately what we think of as spiritually spiritual in terms of a leveraged experience for our collective evolution necessarily. And yes, we're all filtering it through different things. I mean, some of us are probably, getting our news through BBC, CNN, other relatively objective sources. Some of us, of course, sadly, are getting our news from disinformation sources like Fox News here in the U.S. and others may gravitate towards, I don't know necessarily disinformation, but certainly spun information like MSNBC. But regardless, we're still focused all on the same thing in a very unique way. And we're all experiencing our shared needs in a very unique way. And for the most part, in many countries, people are experiencing a collective willingness to do the right thing, to keep themselves safe and keep others safe. And of course, there's always a few folks out there that are just, caught up in their own thing and they haven't gotten to that level of emotional intelligence. It's not their fault. And so they're acting kind of dumb. But the vast majority of people are really, motivated to do what's right, to take care of themselves and take care of their community. And so that's a wonderful collective experience that we're all having. A very powerful collective experience. So I think it's incredibly important right now in the midst of where we are to be super reality focused and also present focused. So although we don't want to necessarily bathe ourselves in all the news and the latest numbers, we need to titrate that so we don't throw ourselves way outside our own resilience zone, right? Our resilience zone, or what Dan Siegel called window of tolerance in trauma work, is that part of our physiology and our emotional life where we can be in a responsive relationship to what is, rather than a reactive fear and survival relationship. So where we can be our best self. And trauma and fear and sometimes tends to shrink that zone. And we need to make it bigger by leading into the edges, but not recklessly. And mindfulness practice, meditation practices are an ideal way to do that. So within our resilience zone, we need to look straight at reality and make sure we're getting good information. And we can, I think it's helpful to listen to people who are thinking big and thinking where this might go, both best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, midline scenarios, not get too lost in those because they're not here yet and we just don't know. Nobody knows. But it's good to be thinking about that, to making sense of it, and thinking about what will contribute to it going one way or the other. Right? We could be headed towards a global economic depression, but maybe not. Or we could be, headed right into the very worst of climate change, or maybe not, if we, depending on how we approach it. So what are the things we can do, beginning with ourselves, to contribute to our collective need to do the things that won't lead to the worst outcomes, and will, lead to the best possible outcomes given what we're facing. So at any rate, not dwelling on the future, but being open to thinking about it a little bit, but not getting locked into, oh, this calamity is going to happen, and then getting all depressed and getting lost in that and getting way outside our resilience zone. Nonetheless, though, within our zone of resilience, I believe it's very important to really look at the reality of where we are right now. And part of that reality is that we're all going to need to become a lot more self-sufficient. So I think it would be helpful for any of us. I'm doing this with my partner. We're getting ready to do this with our organization that is hosting this, of kind of going through a sort of a sufficiency and resilience checkup, if you will, or review. Like really looking at our lifestyle and seeing in what ways can we take care of ourselves, given where we are now and possible outcomes that could be coming our way. Again, not getting crazy with survivalist strategies, but it's in a common sense way, beginning to think through that and realize that self-sufficiency is something that we're really going to need to value so that we can be in a place where we can contribute to the collective and we can care about others and we can, in whatever way we can. We're kind of limited to online connections right now, but in whatever ways we can be creating communities at every possible level, communities of care, communities of resilience at every possible level. We can only do that from a place of our own resilience, right? Our own self-sufficiency. So the point I'd like to make here before opening it up, which we'll do in just a moment, is that everything I'm talking about, I think, requires two things that are core to the Buddhist Dharmic understanding of our path, and sometimes known as like two wings of a bird. And that is wisdom and compassion. Wisdom and compassion. And sometimes we talk about the third one, which is skillful means. And the skillful means will come out of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom and compassion. And again, that's very similar to the idea of not knowing, bearing witness, and loving action, or just the actions that arise out of bearing witness from a place of not knowing. The not knowing is the wisdom, bearing witness is the compassion, and the actions are the skillful means. And compassion in the Dharma is not really a value in the way it is conventionally in the West and the Judeo-Christian culture. And there's nothing wrong with the value of compassion, like being compassionate, caring about others. Of course, that's a really important human value. Compassion in the Buddhist tradition arises from wisdom. It arises from the experience of interdependence, interconnectedness, or dependent causation. So the more we understand about all the complex causes and conditions that led ourselves to where we find ourselves right now as individuals, physically, emotionally, cognitively, psychologically, just where we are, our personality, all of our habits, for better or worse, where we are right now, the more we understand the complexity of that, not that we have to go diving into complexity, but the more we have a sense of the complexity of it, the more that becomes a ground of compassion for ourselves, and also a natural connectedness and compassion with others, because we realize we share in that. It's a shared complexity. We're all connected. We're all suffering together. We will all suffer together, and we will all liberate together. And compassion for others is grounded in that same experience of our interconnectedness and non-separateness. So my Zen teacher used to like to say, that if I somehow had an accident and I gashed my forearm here, great big huge cut, gushing blood, unless I'm in a psychotic state, I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to get it clean, bandage it, go to the doctor if I need to, but I'm going to take care of it. I'm just going to naturally going to do that without thinking. Without thinking, I'm going to do that. And I won't expect a medal afterwards. I won't expect to get the Nobel Peace Prize for having done that. So from his perspective, compassion is that realization that all beings are just like my forearm. All beings are just like my forearm. So any suffering anywhere is my suffering. Of course, the good news, the flip side of that, is any happiness anywhere is my happiness, which is the idea of one of the four Brahma Viharas, or the four immeasurable ones, sympathetic joy. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity. So sympathetic joy is when others are happy, we're happy, which is a great formula for happiness, because there's a lot of happiness going on in the world at different times. And so those tremendous opportunities for us to be happy as well. So others' suffering is our suffering, others' happiness is our happiness. So what that's pointing to is that compassion is arising out of wisdom, out of prajna, our intelligence, seeing the true nature of things. When we actually see the true nature of things, compassion arises quite spontaneously, quite organically. So our ability to look reality right in the face right now, in this thing, this pandemic we're going through, and it's the first wave probably of very challenging things. And none of us know what that's going to look like, or how challenging it'll be at any given time for any of us anywhere. But safe to say, we're probably in challenging times for some time. Our ability to look at that to begin with requires tremendous self-compassion. Our willingness to look at our own part in it. Our willingness to embrace this idea that most of my suffering is self-created, that arises out of my resistance to what is. And it arises out of my preferential mind that insists on it being the way I want it to be, which never works out very long. If it works out accidentally for a moment, the moment passes quickly. So I'm continually suffering. And then I get involved in all kinds of complications and drama all around all that, just creates more and more suffering for myself and others. So the willingness to look at that, and without blame, just seeing the truth of that, without blaming ourselves, just seeing that that's the human condition. It's just the human condition when we're unconscious. The human condition, unexamined, is the source of tremendous suffering, what in the Buddhist world is called samsara, the world of suffering. The human condition, unexamined, is a setup for just tremendous suffering and cycles, never-ending cycles of birth, old age, and death, and further suffering. That same human condition, examined, is the platform for enlightenment, the vehicle for enlightenment and liberation. And which way we go with that is completely and totally up to us. So embracing our responsibility and ownership for that choice, and really living at choice without blame, requires tremendous self-compassion. Tremendous self-compassion. And then in terms of our relationship to the world and others, looking at this reality directly in the eye, and not getting triggered back into fear and survival requires that we stay connected with the interconnectedness, our interconnectedness with all of life, and realizing that whatever happens, we're in this together on so many profound levels. And our own course within that, we can't predict how long we're going to live, what our life is going to be like. But what we can do is recognize that we are all nodes on a net, like Indra's net, that cosmic net. And our job is to be a really good node on that net. So we have to take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, cognitively, our spiritual practice. We need to take care of ourselves to be a very resilient node, and then hopefully be adding more value than we're taking from the net, or at least to be adding as much value as we're receiving, to be a net flow on the net. So that could be a nice inquiry for all of us individually and with our families. What do we need to do to be in that flow with the net of humanity and the net of life on this planet in a way that will help humanity and the planet not only survive, but thrive into the future? Or even if we're, you know, sooner or later, this solar system is going to blow up. So, I mean, there is an end somewhere. Maybe it's billions of years, maybe it's not. But, you know, so we don't know what our course, but if we're involved in this grand experiment, can we evolve it as far as maybe further than any planetary system has ever evolved it yet? Can we participate in that? Right? Even if it's not like imagining never-ending survival and thriving into an infinite future, it may not be infinite, but at the same, unless you think of beyond, you know, this physical reality, but can we do our part to be a really good node in that net of humanity, in that net of life, so that we can really get the spiritual lessons here and move forward as human beings together in alignment with all our fellow species and our first mother, the earth. So let's open it up to a few questions or comments or anything you'd like to share or ask. I want to make sure I have my volume up so I can hear you. Yep.
So if you have a question, you can raise your hand or type it into chat. Either one. Did somebody have their hand raised? I sort of missed. Tom? Okay.
You guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I was getting a unstable connection message on my screen. But so Pete, one of the things you were talking about in terms of the preferential mind, in how we are all sort of learning to become or needing to become more self-sufficient, made me think about basic training. I've never been in the military, but it's sort of like this experience is breaking us down to our most fundamental needs and clarifying what our real needs are as opposed to our wants and necessities versus luxuries. And that seems to me, it sort of fits in with the idea of an opportunity that this can be for a sort of a reordering of our priorities, what really matters in life. I recently read Atul Gawande's book, Being Immortal, and he talks about the idea that facing our mortality rather than paralyzing us or depressing us actually can be liberating. And I think that's another potential good outcome of this experience that we're all going through.
Yes, I completely agree. Thank you very much. And, you know, all the great spiritual traditions say keep death very close, right? That's what wakes us up, and we realize how precious this life is, and can live more in the moment. And, you know, I had a conversation with someone I would encourage people to check out, John Stokes, who's a tracker and who's been teaching tracking and wilderness survival skills for 4 decades probably, and spent a lot of time with the Aboriginal people in Australia, And he's very connected to very many Native American tribes in this country, and also tribes in Brazil and other places. And so I interviewed him. Well, I had a conversation with him, and I'm going to interview him for a global resilience summit we're doing. And he was influenced by Tom Brown, I think his name is. If you ever heard of Tom Brown, I think. And there's this whole world of trackers and that wilderness survival skills. And I've gotten very interested in that in the last couple of years. I want to go do a training somewhere. And I'm very grateful that through the Zen Peacemakers, I've done street retreats for many years where we go out in the streets for 3, 4, 5 days at a time with no money and survive out there. And because I've been out there so many times, you know, not that I want to end up homeless, but I know if I did, I could survive. I know how to. And actually, the fact that I spent 14 years in prison, you know, gives me some sense that, you know, being able to sort of, if all this shit goes away, I can be okay. So I think that's very important, what you're talking about. And it's an opportunity here to think about what's really important in our lives and how can we align our lives in a more sustainable way for ourselves and our planet and each other. Yeah, thank you. Someone else? Anything, please, wide open. Yeah, I see a hand on the left over there. Who's that? That's Sylvia.
I guess I've had a little bit more of a grimmer, might call it grimmer realization. I have a 96-year-old mother who most likely will pass away in the next 5 years at some point. And if she goes to the hospital for anything, she will most likely get the coronavirus. She already has a DNA, so I'm not concerned about having that conversation with her. But I myself am nearing 65, and so I'm actually in a high-risk category as well. And so I've actually read a number of posts on other people's Facebook's page about considering my own end-of-life wishes. And am I going to, because I mean, some of the hospitals are already reaching this crisis point where they have to decide who gets a ventilator and who doesn't. And so thinking, I teach university students, and so thinking of both my own son and some of my students, would I make a choice? So it's not about survival for me, it's more about who am I, who do I want to be in terms of giving chances to other people that are younger than me? And so I think that has been a realization, difficult as that is to consider because I'm very healthy, but I've read reports of people, you know, how you can be healthy and then take a downturn very quickly. What needs to be in place in terms of really facing this this pandemic very realistically, because even if we do just have till May, everything seems to be shut down till May, there are also the long-term issue is that there will be waves until we have a vaccine. It will reoccur in various ways. And so just to be aware of what my own mortality and what my wishes are. So it's hard to deal with, but it's there. So
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Sylvia. Yeah. I mean, it's very sobering to think about all that and look about that, but very necessary and very mature and very compassionate for ourselves and for others. This is a great time. One of the things that my partner Sophie and I are doing now is that I want to do for a long time is reorganize our stuff, and each of us have a death folder. So if something happened to us, the other person knows where everything is, how to access things, how to take care of things, what to do. Or if heaven forbid something happened to both of us, somebody else would know what to do. And this is a great time to get an advance directive or a living will in place if we've never done that before. So if we did end up in a hospital, you know, there would be something in place, and also to share that with people so our friends and family know what our wishes are. Because if you don't have that with clarity, sometimes hospitals are just forced to go to some default means, and that might not be in alignment with our wishes. So these things are all kind of sobering things to do, but they're very responsible and emotionally mature things to do, and compassionate for ourselves and compassionate for others, for sure. Yeah. And, you know, I think someone mentioned something before, but I mean, these things don't, you know, on the other hand, for me, on the other side, even though looking reality square in the face, either the reality of what we're going through with this global pandemic and what are the immediate impacts, what could be second, third order impacts, you know, coming down the road in terms of the economy and all the rest of it. Um, um, it's very sobering, or as Sylvia just talked about, looking at the realities of our family members passing, our own passing, all very sobering. But on the other side of that actually is the possibility of tremendous joy. When we actually deal with reality and embrace it, there's a way that we get in alignment with ourselves and in alignment with life that's actually joyful and freeing. There's a tremendous amount of freedom. I mean, even if you can imagine doing the work to create a death folder, that sounds like a horrible thing to do. Maybe I gotta come up with a better name for that, a survivor folder or something, right? And you know, it seems like a depressing. No wonder we don't do it. We avoid it like the plague, right? It's something I know I need to do that. We'll put it off forever, right? But or an advance directive, or getting our will and getting our affairs in order, whatever. But once we do it, we feel good. We feel much better on the other side of that. We feel a certain freedom and lightness and maturity and response. You know, it feels good. So we instinctually recoil from and avoid that which is uncomfortable, and we think that's the way to feel okay. But you know, human beings have been figuring out for thousands of years all over the globe that way doesn't really work. It hasn't stopped most of us from continuing to do it, but it doesn't work. It's leaning in. You know, freedom and joy are on the other side of leaning in, not avoidance.
Fleet, I think Apple had a question. Do you still have a question, Apple?
Where is it?
Apple?
Yeah, please. Hi, Apple.
If your name is Apple, I don't know.
Is your name Apple?
And I don't know how to make it not apples.
Oh, that's. What is your name?
Jonavi.
Okay.
Okay, nice to meet you.
I'll work on that
Yeah,
for next time. Yeah, I just wanted to say hello because this is my first time being with this community, but I have been sort of following all of you from the sidelines for a couple of years now, and actually had an article sent to me by Justin, who's on this call now, from Justin by you, Fleet Maull, and Justin and I have both been kind of following you, and we've actually been pen pals for a couple of years, and Justin is now out in Austin. And so I just quickly invited him on the call because it's kind of like this full circle of writing to each other and, you know, thinking about the whole prison system and all these different things, and then finally being here with you in person and then getting Justin on the call. So I'm just happy to be here, and the circumstances are strange, but at the same time I feel relieved to be with other people who have similar, I guess, who are on similar paths and have similar goals. And I've also done some training with Tom Brown and his student, John Young. So I thought that was pretty cool that you mentioned him. So yeah, just saying hello and thank you for all of you for being here.
thank you. Very nice to meet you. So Justin, you're in Austin. Do you know Sarah Ness?
I don't know if you can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I've just been released from incarceration about a month and a half ago. So everything's really weird right now. I can't tell you 100% that I know Sarah Ness. The community I practice with here is is a offshoot of Plum Village called
Yeah.
Plum Blossom Sangha. And I wrote a lot to your mindfulness foundation while I was down and received some amazing material. And I just again thank you for this opportunity and taking the time out of your schedule. And I know it's kind of weird out there, and just adjusting to this whole flattening the curve type of business. Um, in one respect, I heard someone talk about this is kind of like a basic training sort of thing. Uh, Prior service member, United States Army, 2005 to 2011. So I got to see some strange and interesting things. And on one level, yes, it is kind of it is different. I'm interested to see how this will affect society as a whole, business, and how we interact with each other. Whereas things before were quite different, they're also quite different now. Um, and I'm just interested to see, and there's nothing that's going to let that allow to happen besides time. And again, I just wanted to say that and thank you. Can you tell me a little bit more about the person that you mentioned here in Austin?
The first.
The person you mentioned here
Oh
in
yeah,
Austin.
I will. Well, first of all, I'm really glad you're home, brother. Glad you're out. And all of our fellow citizens who are in our prisons and jails right now are in very vulnerable places, and the staff who are there to keep them safe and try to keep the world safe. Everybody's in a very vulnerable position, but I'm glad you're out. And what a weird time to get out, to go from one kind of confinement into this home confinement we're all in. So yeah, the weirdness factor is really off the charts in the world today.
I would call this the worst pre-release unit I've ever been at.
Yeah. So yeah, and you have Kate Crisp, who's on the call, to thank for everything you received while you were in from Prison Mindfulness Institute. She directs that, and so I'm glad you were on the receiving end of some of the things that we send in. And Sarah Ness is involved in what they call the authentic relating movement, I think it's called. Kate, is it called authentic relating?
Authentic revolution.
Yeah, but don't they call what they do authentic relating as well?
The main thing is circling, but then they do this thing called authentic relating.
Yeah, right. Okay. Anyway, her base, I think, is Austin, and she's just on my radar screen. She's on an online event I'm going to be tuning in to later today, and also going to be talking to her in the next couple of days about possibly being involved in this global resilience summit we're putting together. So anyway, I think she's based in Austin. Sarah Ness, you can look her up on the web. Authentic Revolution.
Will do for sure. Thanks to Kate Crisp for being able to get those bits of information funneled down to me. Thank you, Fleet Maull. Thank you, Yanavi, and everyone else here today.
I wanted to make an announcement because, we had an experience last week that I didn't want to repeat, and Zoom put in all these different security measures this week, including because I have a particular type of Zoom account, I had to have either, they locked it down. They would not allow me to not have either waiting room or password. And so several people got put into the waiting room and they had numbers as their names. And I kept writing to them over and over and nobody responded. Now, whether they got the messages, I don't know. So if you hear of anybody that gets in the waiting room and never makes it in, because I just didn't let them in because they had numbers. And one of them had the name room, and room is, you're going to have to put in other words, please put your name in. So I know, I of course I don't know all of you, but at least if you have a name, then it's easier than a number for me to locate if it's another situation like we had last week. Because that was kind of like a scramble to find who it was that was doing that thing. Some people I know who you are, like I know who Lyjos Associate is, that kind of thing. But if I don't know your name, it's going to be harder for me to admit you if you put a number or something like that up there. So, and if you see that thing that I'm typing to you, please write something back if you want to get in the room. Anyway, there's more security now. Thank you, Zoom, but it makes it a little more difficult.
Thank you, Kate. For those of us of you who weren't here last Sunday, I've been reading about Zoom bombing, this new phenomenon. I'm sure we've all read about it now, and I've just been reading about it, and then boom, it happened to us. So we'll try to prevent that from happening in the future. Although in some ways, if it did happen again, it's an opportunity to practice with that. We kind of just shut it down and then came back online last time. And in retrospect, it would have been nice to try to relate with the bombers and see what they were really up to, what they were really needing. It might have worked, might not have worked, but also we didn't want people to just get exposed to somebody on there screaming obscenities. So we did shut it down and we came back, and fortunately they didn't come back. But there's a lot of, we're all really struggling. And so that gets expressed in lots of ways. So we need to have a lot of compassion for ourselves and everyone else right now. Well, I think we're kind of at the end of our time here together today.